Remix. Recording in progress. Got it. A couple things about Remix. So number one, I would say it falls in the category of React meta frameworks. And you may be thinking, well, what's the difference between like React and a React meta framework? A React meta framework adds some, like a simple way to think about it is that it adds some structure around your React application and adds like some, enables you to do some things like a little bit easier, right? So for example, many of you are familiar with Next.js and what it does. It comes out of the box with things like server-side rendering through its static site generation. And it makes it really easy for you to do routes, right? So for you, those of you who have done Next.js before, you have a folder where you can drop your files in and they map to routes. And so the meta frameworks are things that provide extra functionality to an existing library or framework that just come out of the box to you, right? So it solves a lot of problems, makes it easier for you and your team to develop websites. So I'm going to try and share again. And let's see if I can get the right screen. I have too many screens at this point. Do this one. There we go. So I am on, if you all can't see this, let me know. What you should be able to see is the the remix.run website. So this is the official Remix Reps website. And as an introduction to Remix, I want to walk you all through their homepage, right? So the homepage for good libraries and good frameworks will give you some information about the things that they value. And so I just want to share this to you all. So before we do this, there's a couple, there's actually one last thing you should know about Remix, and that it's a little bit different than Next in the sense that Remix really is truly a full stack solution for your website. So the creators of Remix have compared it to the old PHP websites. I guess that it's largely still exists, right? They're really not that old, but compared it to PHP websites where you have control of the templating and also the backend, all a lot of times in the same file, right? So you'll see some of that as well. So this really is a full stack framework where React lives largely at the center of it. So it's a great tool in a lot of ways. And we'll go into more depth on that here in a moment. So this is like their big tagline here. I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit so it's easier to see. It says, focused on web fundamentals and modern UX, you're simply going to build better websites, right? So this part of what they're trying to do is return to web fundamentals with React. And you'll see more about this. They believe that the better abstractions are closer to the way that the web was written. So you'll see more of that here in a moment. But that's part of what they value. And part of learning Remix, the claim is by its creator, is that if you learn Remix, you're going to become a better web developer, right? Because you're going to be closer to the way that the web was intended to work. So that's part of it. They got some testimonials here. If we go down to this is actually really interesting for those of you who care about deploying websites, right? So if you're still learning React and you're kind of in the beginning stages, you may not have thought about this yet, but what it says is that while you were waiting for your static site to build, distributed web infrastructure got really good. Break through the static. And this actually, for those of you who were here earlier on, Clint asked the question, well, does this thing scale, right? And that's an important question. And this is a little bit related to it because it's related to the way that we deploy Remix. So to give you some background, with a tool like Next.js, what you would do is you would build your site, right? You'd run a build command, and you would go through a compiler like Webpack or Rollup or something, and the entire thing would build out, right? You would come up and you would get this gigantic JavaScript bundle, and then you go stick in a CDN somewhere, and people go and they'd be able to call a CDN or whatever, and then they get your website, and then you start loading in data, and that's how it would be built. So let's suppose that you make a typo on your website, like on some blog or something, and suppose you have like 1,000 articles or you have 1,000 web pages. You'd have to go back and build the entire thing from scratch and then go put it back in your CDN. That's the process. And so that's what they're talking about. While you're waiting for your static site to build, distributed web infrastructure got really good. What they mean by distributed web infrastructure, they mean that we have servers that are now just globally available, servers or workers, right, that are very distributed that you can deploy to. So let me give you an example. The new Free Code Camp Dallas website is built with Remix, and we've deployed it to Cloudflare. So it's on a Cloudflare worker. What that means for our users is that wherever they are in the world, there's probably a Cloudflare worker pretty dang close to them. Cloudflare is very distributed. So for me, when I go to fCC Dallas, I can go look at my network tab and I see that I'm talking to a server in DFW. For someone who is like in in Canada or something, they're gonna have something that there's going to be a server, Cloudflare server that's likely close to them, right? Or Cloudflare worker. Someone in South America, same story, right? And this is what it means to have distributed web infrastructure. And to give you, it might be useful to do this. Let's do this just for a moment. I'm going to go to Google Images, and we're going to look up. Let's see, Cloudflare server locations, right? They have maps of these. But if you look at these, let's see if we can get a good image of this. All those orange spots is where your website's going to live. It's all going to get propagated to all these locations. So highly distributed, out of the box, easy to deploy to. It's trivial. Whereas in the past, this was harder to do. And certainly, even if you had distributed systems in the past, you generally wouldn't have this many for a small scale website. So that's what they mean by distributed infrastructure getting really good. So with that breakthrough, that means that we can now have servers close to the user so that if they go to our website and we want to do server-side rendering where the server builds the web page on the fly and then gives it to the user, they don't have, someone in New York doesn't have to talk to a server in like California or something. There's probably a server right there in New York, so it's super fast. And so I can deploy my website, and it has a small build. It's easy to do. It goes back up, and now everything's ready to go. It's much faster in that regard. There is work on the server per web page, right? So we don't have it all pre-built on like in some CDN. Now it lives in the server where you make the request, the server builds it. Now what happens is the server will build it, but now we can cache it in these networks that exist globally. So this is part of the question of, well, does it scale, right? And Glenn, to answer your question from earlier, Cloudflare largely, things like Cloudflare largely scale themselves. It's very easy to scale Cloudflare applications. So I hope that wasn't too far deep into the deployment realm and too far away from maybe like the core of Remix. But this is a really neat thing about Remix when you're comparing it to other meta frameworks. So for those of you who are more like just starting with React and looking for more practical explanations for things regarding React and how to build this, we'll get there in a moment. But this is actually really interesting part of Remix. So, and by the way, if there's any questions, feel free to interject and ask. I'm totally open to that. Cool. So let's scroll down a little bit. Remix has these cool things called nested routes. We may talk about those later. Essentially, the way that the routing folder works is that you can nest routes, right? So you'll notice on the visual I have here, this is example.com. When you go to sales, they just built this route as a child of example.com. And so now sales takes up the entire green space, but sales also has children, right? So there may be many sales pages, but there's only one invoice page. And that invoice page would be the yellow. But anything that has sales will have that parent, but we can switch through the yellow. The portion in yellow can be different pages, right? It can be sales/invoices, maybe sales/receipts or something. We can switch those out. It makes it really nice with the reusability. This is another thing that they're big on Remix, is that with Remix you can basically get rid of most of your loading states. So for those of you who have built React apps in the past, where you have to generally, when you go to a page, the first thing you do, if it has data from backend, is you show a spinner, right? For Remix, since it's server-side rendered, the goal is to have all the data there when the page is loaded, right? So the server fills all that in. When once presented to the user, it's all there on one request. And that's a big deal for them as well. And they say that this is way faster and jank-free. So it's pretty fun. And they have some visuals of the waterfall. And then I wanted to show you all this really fun visual. They did a great job building this website. And they have this like spinner hell thing going. They say goodbye to Spinagetting, right? So that's a little bit about Remix. I'm going to post this link to remix.run inside of the chat. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about, I want to speak a little bit more about Remix. And then we'll look at some examples with the Free Code Camp Dallas website, and then we'll do a small demo app. So let me go to our Zoom link. And I may have lost it. That's okay. I will post this later. But essentially, it's the Remix run website. Cool. So the next thing I want to do is go to the Free Code Camp Dallas page and show you some of the things that Remix does for us just out of the box, right? So these are benefits that we get from using Remix as a React meta framework and specifically Remix, right? So some of these are going to be Remix specific. Some of them are going to be React metadata, React meta framework specific. I'm going to try to be clear as to what's what. So generally with React meta frameworks, you're going to get your content. It's going to have some SEO optimizations, and one of them is that your content is going to be server-side rendered, or it's going to be available when the server grabs the page. So let me show you this. For those of you who have ever used Create React App, one of the things you can do is go and view the page source, and you'll notice that there's almost nothing on the page source, and that's because the content's not available until after the JavaScript runs. But for things like Next.js and Remix, we actually have that available on our source. And this makes it, number one, easier for search engines to read. And number two, it means that when our users come to the page, there's not some kind of like white flash, right? It's not some like blank page that flashes content. The content's ready and available when the user comes to the page. So that's really interesting. More interesting than that, I think, is some of the things that Remix is going to do for us in our network tab. So I'm going to reload the page. And I wanted to show you all some of the lazy loading that we get out of the box with Remix. I think it's pretty nice. So I'm going to do Command R. And you all will see that I have my network requests up here, right? You'll notice that everything is nice and chunked. So I have a lot of different JavaScript files. They're all broken apart real nicely. And there's quite a few things we could say about this page. You also notice one of the things that Cloudflare has that's really nice is we're using HTTP3, which has some benefits that we won't go into. But for Remix specifically, one of the things that it gives us that a lot of React meta frameworks will probably give you as well is the fact that we don't have to load up our entire JavaScript bundle when we get to this page. If you look down at my, if you look down here at the amount of content that we loaded, you'll see that we have some pretty low numbers here, not even like a megabyte of data that's been loaded onto the page. So like we have, let me do this one more time. In terms of JavaScript, figure this out. Let's do a fresh page load. There we go. You'll notice that I have, I'm using Firefox. I'm not entirely sure like which of these is. It looks like there's 300 out of 130, which doesn't make sense. But you'll notice that there's a relatively low amount of JavaScript being loaded onto the browser. And that's made possible by lazy loading, right? So one of the things I'm going to do now is I'm going to clear this by clicking this garbage can. And I'm going to go to the cohorts page, right? And when I go to the cohorts page, what you're going to see is that there's going to be some fresh requests made. So there's chunks that we didn't previously have. And these are going to be React components that we didn't need for the home page that we now have for the cohorts page. So if I click on this, right, we can go look at the response. There's probably nothing meaningful in here, but you can see it's fresh JavaScript that we didn't previously have. So it does this out of the box. Yes. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, Rob. Can you zoom in a little bit?
Yeah, let me zoom in on this. There we go. It's a little bit easier to see.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. So there's actually not a ton interesting going on right here, except the fact that, if you look, we got like 0.5 kilobyte loaded for this chunk, whereas in other React apps, you may have had to load the bulk of your like vendors bundle or something, or you would have had to do this optimization yourself. It's really nice to have this with React meta frameworks. And there's actually something else I want to show you here in one second. Let me show you this. This is neat. This is not a Remix specific thing, but it comes with meta frameworks, and it's actually something the web gives us as well. If I hover over blog, you'll notice that we also prefetch, right? So if I hover here, you'll notice the content for that page loaded inside my network tab. And that way, when I go to this page, the content just loads up, right? So it's super nice. It gives your users a fast experience, while at the same time, you don't have to like load all the content all at once at the beginning of your app. So big wins there. So that's a little bit about the performance benefits of Remix and some of the things that you'll see in the network tab. So with that said, I was going to jump over next to the source code for this project and show some of more practical things about how Remix is structured. Before I did that, was there anyone that had questions about anything we talked about in the network tab or anything like that? I'll do my best to answer any questions that you all may have. Cool. If you all think of anything, feel free to chime in. So let's go over and start looking at some code. I'm going to go to github.com/freecodecampdallas/fCC Dallas. This is where our repo lives. I'm going to push the period, which will pull open my I guess web editor or whatever that VS Code has made available online now, which is pretty awesome. And you're going to see that we have our project here. I wanted to show you a couple things because Remix is actually really interesting in the way that we work with components. First off, let's start with the most basic example, which is going to be our homepage. The homepage on Free Code Camp Dallas is actually 100% static. I'm saying 100% static. There's a little bit of JavaScript on there, but it's when I say static, I mean there's not interaction with the backend in terms of like making additional form requests or anything like that. So I'm going to open up the app directory, which is where our stuff lives. You'll notice I have my routes directory here. This routes is where you can start dropping in routes for your page. So for those of you wanting to get started with Remix, one of the first things you would do is you would generate your project, and then you would start dropping files into this routes folder. So for example, the index.tsx file automatically becomes the home route, right? It's index. The useful-links file, this automatically becomes fccdallas.com/useful-links. So the way that this is spelled is how it's going to be mapped to your URL and how it's going to be available to the public, right? So let's talk about our homepage. This is probably going to be a really good start to understanding Remix and how it's built. You'll notice down here,
Rob,
go ahead.
can you zoom in a little bit? Sorry.
Of course. Yep. That is wonderful feedback. There we go. Is that a little bit better?
Yes. I needed a
Cool.
magnifying glass before, so this is a lot better.
I forget sometimes that when I share this, share my screen, people tell me the same thing at work. It's like the screen's so big that it displays so small on when you do screen sharing. So please, if that happens again, just let me know. So the first thing first is you'll notice we have these, if you can hear what I said before, these routes on the side will become our routes on our page, right? So fccdallas.com is the index.tsx route. If I wanted to do a more specific route like useful links, right? Useful-links, then useful-links.tsx will be the file that is going to be used for the page level component at fccdallas.com/useful-links. That's how the router works. It's all by convention. We don't have to dig into React Router to do this meaningfully. We just drop a file in and it matches the route. Next.js does something very similar. Does anyone have questions about what that means? If not, then I wanted to show a little bit about this page. So now for some stuff that may be a little bit more interesting in terms of Remix specific like ways of doing things, right? So this index is my React component. This is what you expect to see on any React page or any React project you're working on. You have your React component. And of course, it has some content. So that's, for those of you who know React, this should be straightforward, right? We have a component, a page level component. It returns our template, and that is what becomes our page. All right, so where this becomes different is in the functions that Remix uses to for us to map things to our page, right? So as a page level component, Remix looks for certain functions that it can use to help build your page. So for example, in Remix, you don't import styles like you do in other React projects. And instead, what you'll do is you'll define this links function. And this links function will mimic the link HTML tag that we have on web pages, right? So this is largely about returning to the way that the web was made to be built. So instead of saying, so this is static styles, right? Instead of saying import static styles like this and just being available to my page, I'll import static files from this location, and then I will add the variable as the href to my style sheet, right? And this tells Remix, hey, when you build this website, add these link tags, add this style sheet from static styles and index styles. If you were using some kind of CDN, by the way, like I know we talked about on our coworks team about Materialize, you could also drop in like an HTTPS, like long URL out or whatever you needed to. Remix would take that and integrate it with your page. So that's totally available as well. Another thing here to notice is that we have these headers. So this Remix page is actually a server-side route, like this index page or whatever. When you go to fccdallas.com, this is actually a GET request that Remix is providing for us. And so we can provide headers on this route. So for example, we're defining the cache control here. This topic is actually really interesting in and of itself with Remix about how to properly define your cache. I would encourage everyone to go check out Ryan Florence's talk on this. He will break down the way that caching works, especially with the way it works with things like Cloudflare workers, for example. It's really interesting. But we won't dive into that right now. Just know that you can control the amount of time that your page is cached, and you can do that at the page level. And even if you wanted to, by the way, you can make these dynamic with variables, right? So it's very powerful in the way that we define the headers for our page. So this is a good introduction to the way that we do things with Remix, right? We have a React component, but we have stuff around it that kind of defines how we should build the web page and how we can modify the request to the web page. So on one hand, we have the links, which help build the links to the page. And then we have our headers file, which here is where we can set headers for the GET request that we made. So I'm going to go down this path a little bit more because you're going to see this a lot with Remix, where you have these functions at the top that can let us hook into certain kinds of functionality with Remix. A great place to look for this, by the way, is if we go to, oh goodness, let's see. We go to the sign up page. So cohort signup.tsx. When you go to the cohorts page and there's a cohort available, you can sign up. So we have a form, right? And the whole idea with the form is that you enter some details about yourself. It's going to make a post request. We're going to go save in a database, and we'll have information about you so that we can reach out to you and you can sign up for our cohort. That's the entire goal of our cohort sign up page. So we're going to start with what we know, which is the React component. This is a page level component that we have here. So cohort sign up, right? This is what we know. But the more interesting thing about this is the way that we're going to work with the actual sign up page itself in terms of how it interacts with our backend. Because guess what? Remix has our backend a part of this page as well, right? Just like PHP, where you can hook into your backend, Remix has that backend here as well. So you'll notice that we have some helper functions up here. So one of the things we do on load, instead of, we have some dynamic data, right? When we load this page up, we're going to load information about the cohort. Traditionally, with other React projects, what you would do is load your page, and then you would make a network request to your database and say, hey, give me the name of this cohort or whatever. That way we can grab the cohort name. With Remix, it doesn't do it that way. With Remix, we grab that information on the server. So you'll see I have this hook here on line 172. It says use loader data. And that's going to give us access to information from the server. So it's like, well, where does this loader data come from? Let me show you. Let's go up to find the loader. And the loader's here. So the really important thing here that I want you to notice is that we were just on a React component on the same file. When we go up to line 60 here on export const loader, this loader function is a server-side function. This loader gets run on the server, which is very different, right? This is very different. This is very different than what we're used to with React. So I have my loader function, and on the server, I'm going to make a call to Supabase, which is what we are using for our Postgres database. It's a tool that we use. We select some information, we get it, and then at the end, we are going to send some information about our cohort, right? And it's going to be made available to our webpage. So this is all available in the loader. So if I want to send something through to my front end, I can define the data here in the loader. The server can do its thing, and then it can have it available on load for my function. So if I come back down here to use loader data, whatever that loader function returns is going to be now available in my Remix component, my React component that is in Remix, right? So for us, you'll notice that we have, we're looking for a cohort name, right? If we don't have it, then we will return this no upcoming cohorts. If we do have it, then we can display this loader data.cohort.name. We can display that on the page. And that's what we got from our server side loader function, right? Through our use loader data hook. All right, so that's actually kind of a lot to expose you all to. I wanted to make sure, like, if there's any questions at all about what's going on, or if anyone's lost, please speak up. And if there's questions in the chat, I'm really sorry. I'm not like, I've lost my Zoom window. So just speak up if there's anything that you want questions about.
No questions in the chat.
Cool. So that's how you load data in Remix, right? We have the full stack available to us inside the same file for our loader. Now you may be asking, okay, well, you're on the form and you submit information to the backend. How does that work? And I'm going to show you that now. So if you go down here, we have our form. One optimization we could have is that Remix actually has a form with a capital F component, and it will do some things for us behind the scenes. And we should probably switch that. We're using a regular form. This works, but we could totally use this with a like capital F form, right, from Remix. But that aside, the way this works is that we have inputs on the page, right? So these different field inputs, we collect data, and we've kind of done some stuff to make Remix work with React hook forms here. But in most cases, what you would do is you would have your data, you have your inputs, and you would have a submit button, right? And for those of you who don't know, the way that forms work is you can add a method to them, right? And this method could be like post usually. Yeah, put post or whatever, right? And when you submit the form, the page would submit to whatever route that you define in your form. And this is how the web largely used to work until we start leaning into AJAX requests a lot, right? It's one of the things that Ryan Florence, by the way, points out, one of the creators of Remix, is that a lot of people don't know this. So I want to call this out as well going through this, just in case y'all didn't know. Like this method, this form will submit an API route. For those of you who know the web and know that part of the web, you'll notice we didn't define a route on my form. And that's because when we click submit, it's actually going to do a post request to fcc.com fccdallas.com/cohort signup, right? It's going to be the same request to this cohort signup page. Our cohort signup is actually a post route now, as well as a get route for the page. And so we're going to handle this data that we're getting. So we go down as a user, we click submit, it does a post request. We're going to grab the name of the input fields, right? We have the name property, so cohort ID, first name, last name, etc. And now what we can do is we can go to another server-side function in Remix called action. And this handles the form submissions in Remix, which is really different, right? So now as a front-end developer, like I have access to my server-side code and can deal with the results of this action. So you'll notice here that we have const action. It's an asynchronous request. We get the request as a parameter. We can grab the form data with request.form data, and then I can get each of the pieces of data off my form here. So core ID, first name, last name, email. I can grab all these on the server, right, and inside the same file. And we do some stuff here. We validate it, and then we go put all this information in a database. And the really amazing thing again that happens here is that this all happens inside this cohort signup file. So again, just real briefly to drive it home. The cohort sign up on fCC Dallas, you'll go to the page. On the same file, you'll define a loader function that will grab things server side that's not exposed to the client. It will make information available to your component, which is created and server side rendered. It's packaged up, it's shipped to the browser. And then when it's ready to submit the form, it will post a request to that's defined inside the same file to this action, right? And this whole thing happens very powerfully with Remix. So that's, if you want the very most basic parts of Remix, that really is probably a good place to start, is how you use loader and actions. So again, if there's any questions about that, like I feel free to ask. I'm happy to stop.
Hey, Rob.
Go ahead, Steven.
Hey, so this is fascinating to me. I've always wanted to do a deep dive into Remix. So going back to the form submission, are you saying like we don't have to do the whole song and dance where we do the prevent default and saving like inputs to state and all that stuff? Exactly.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny you mentioned the prevent default. That's part of the jank that they talk about with Remix that you're getting around, right? Is working around the way the web's made. Instead of working around the way the web's made, it's embracing the way that the web has traditionally handled forms, and they baked that into their meta framework, and it's incredible.
Dude, that's awesome. That's exciting.
Yeah, it's really cool. I definitely enjoyed. I've made a couple Remix projects now. I've definitely enjoyed that aspect of it. Something I will also wanted to touch on real quick is that I think maybe if I were looking at this for the first time, I'd say, man, that's a lot of code, right? That's a lot of code to have all in place. Is there some way for me to break apart some of this backend code, right, in my loaders and actions into some other place in my app? I may not want all this here, right? And it's really interesting. Like if you go to a Remix project, they generally have some space for their server-side code. So for us, I have I call it services, and I created a server component. The convention in Remix is to have this .server.ts to tell the compiler explicitly that this code will never be available on the client, right? We'll never ship this code to the browser. It's an extra layer of safety on top of tree shaking. And so we have some code here for our redirects that we have. But what you could do is you could certainly go to your cohort signup page, and we could pull a lot of that out into these into a .server.ts file. We could have that all separate out where it may be a little bit easier to test. We could break it down, right? And all that would be available to us as well. So I guess the point of showing you all this is that we really, like, when we started this talk, we were starting this as front-end people, right? And as we progress, we have these little ways that we can hook into back-end functionality through our Remix repo. And a really interesting thing that Ryan Flores has talked about is how Remix will trick will trick front-end developers into becoming full-stack developers, right? So in the past, you may not have cared about what the backend's doing as much because you have backend teams to worry about it, right? You may not have cared about how you deploy your site because that's going to be DevOps job. But with Remix, it brings it all together in a really exciting way. So I was going to do a demo, but we're getting kind of close on time. It's already 7:48.
Hey, Rob.
Go ahead.
Clint had a question in the chat. He said, is Remix assisting with validation / error handling, or are you using a library? Do they even exist at this point in the form?
For the form in terms of the front end or the back end, so the I would say that the validations that I've seen, I could be wrong here. I've not seen a Remix validation library, right? They encourage validations, of course, on the server side and the client side. And the client side has a lot of libraries for this, right? On the server side, most of their validations have been pretty custom. So with something like, with Nest.js or something, they use like annotations or something, right? Where you can say, oh, this is a required field. You're not really getting that in Remix. I think there's a second part of that question, which was error handling. And I'll say that one of the things I was really happy with Remix was that you can add really nice error boundaries to Remix. So if something unexpected happens, it's kind of baked in the framework where you'll have these fallback pages. And this isn't really as much a Remix thing as like a well-designed React thing, but they make it really easy for you. And let me show to Clint's question. Hopefully this is within the bounds of your question. If there's some sort of unexpected error, we'll certainly be able to map that so the user can see that, right? And the way that we do this is with these error boundaries and these catch boundaries, right? So it's been a minute since I've actually touched these, but essentially the way this works is that, we're in the root.tsx, so I've added these at the global level. So if Remix gets one of these errors, a 401 or a 404, it will display our 401 or 404 page. And that does it for us out of the box. And we can do that right now on the fCC Dallas side, I think, unless I have a redirect. I may have redirects in here, so it may not work. Page not found, right? And that's that 404 error page that we're getting, that you're seeing there, right? It's showing this. The error boundary is going to show us when there's some new error that's thrown, like unexpected error. So in this case, you'll notice that we have this match statement, which by the way, TS pattern is an incredible TypeScript package. That's what this match is. If y'all don't have it and don't know about exhaustive pattern matching, I'd definitely check it out. What this match statement says is that if we get a status of 401, give us an error 401 page. If we get 404, give us the error 404 page. Otherwise, throw a new error, and it will show us our 500s page, which is for unexpected errors. And so that's at the root component, the very highest level component. The other really nice thing about this is that I can actually nest this into pages to where nested routes can get these. And so it's going to select the most specific boundary based on where I'm at the page, right? So if I have a boundary for a 401 that's defined in my dashboard at TSX, it's going to show that boundary instead of this one. So it's all hierarchical in that sense. So Clint, I hope that answered your question. I know that your question is probably more about form validations, but this thing about like error handling is also like super interesting. So
yeah, I saw that stuff. I'm glad you touched on it. Because yeah, it's definitely interesting having like the nested routes, having kind of like individual little like custom error handle pages and stuff. So it's a cool thing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I actually, Clint, one of the things maybe one of the last things we talked about tonight is about like, how do you scale a remix project? Because I know that was one of your original questions, and it's actually a really important question. Like, how is this website supposed to be used? And you know what, first, when I was looking at this framework, I thought, well, if I'm going to buy into a remix project, I'm probably going to be locked into this monolithic architecture with remix. That was my first thought. And I thought, well, if there's some like big time dashboard, then maybe this might not be the best way to go. But there's another side to this too. I think that, and I don't know how much this has been explored. It's something worth thinking about. With remix, what it implicitly does is it gives your front end team a slice of the server, right? And so we can imagine a scenario where, we have some massive microservices architecture that exists that feeds into our dashboard. And that all exists except for our front end has like these simple things it can do on the server, like by itself. If we want to call some database, we can do that by ourselves. If it's simple enough and we can kind of own that, then we can do that. And it can scale massively, right? With Cloudflare workers, we can scale that stuff out. If the worker environment doesn't work and we need a more complete Node.js environment, something like Fly.io gives us massively distributed data node servers, right? And so those are all things to think about with Remix. And when you think about Remix in terms of how does this change the way that I think about development and architecture, I think that is really the question to answer. How does this change the role of the front end developer? What does it mean for the front end to get its own slice of the back end? So if anyone has thoughts on that, by the way, I would love to hear them now here towards the end. But that's one of the things that struck me about Remix. So if that's it, if there's no other questions, I'll say this just in closing, that Remix is massive. There is so much you can do with Remix, and there are so many benefits that we didn't touch on. I definitely encourage you all to go check out Kent Dodd's stuff on Remix. He has so much material on Remix. And then if you really want your thinking challenged, go check out Ryan Florence's videos about Remix and about how Remix changes the way we think about the web. They're brilliant. It'll make you a better web developer even if you never touch Remix. Definitely encourage you though to try this meta framework out for your next project. And if you want to try it out, maybe consider contributing to fCC Dallas. So that's it.
Cool. Let me well, first, thanks Rob for giving us that talk. That was really cool. That was interesting. I haven't done a deep dive on Remix yet either, so that was neat. Cool. Well, if anybody is interested in giving a talk, I have somebody set up for March and for April already, but after that, if there's something that you're just like you really want to talk about or teach about, feel free to reach out to me and let me know. It can be anything. It can literally be like, here's how HTML works. Like, that's fine. This isn't a React, like this isn't the React group. This is anything within development. So
anything. Oh,
anything within development, Stephen.
He snuck that qualifier in.
I did, yeah. As a decorator, actually. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, yeah, cool. So let me throw some links in here again. I'm just throwing 3 in there this time. So this is our YouTube link. This is where the video will be tomorrow. At some point during the day when I have a chance. The Discord link, if you hadn't had a chance to join, I saw we had like five new people jump in earlier, and then our next meetup link is down there at the bottom. Stephen is going to be talking about backend, not anything, Stephen. So he's going to have to, figure that out. But anyway, yeah. So other than that, if anybody wants to just hang out and talk or whatever, that's fine too. You can ask Rob questions and listen to his kids in the background, whatever. So